bit in terms of logistics because we're having it filmed today. So Rotem here is Drager Performance Center guy. This is Nash, who's going to be the subject today. This is Ashley, who's working for various people in the department.
Emily.
Emily. Oh, I was saying Ashley. That's why you weren't Ashley. Emily. That's Emily. I hadn't met her before. And this is Isley, and he's going to be filming. So he will be moving around some too. Try to act natural. You're being filmed, right? Look forward. Don't look at the camera.
So we're going to give you 1 minute to kind of do your hair. And
yeah, that's right. Touch up the makeup, make sure everything's in place. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Hartney. I'm Kathy Hartney. And I'm going to be lecturing to you, yay, on Wednesday and Friday. So I'll be seeing you guys this week and then in a few weeks also. And then I have the Tuesday lab and there's some Wednesday lab folks in here. I will pass around, now that we're all settled in and things get rolling, I'm going to pass around a legal pad, write your name on it. Guests don't have to write their name on it. But anybody that's in 234, write your name on it so I know that you're here. You've got 2 handouts. You probably won't be needing them for a little while, but you should notice that one of the handouts sort of matches some of the stuff that's on that board, right? And so Rotem, as he works through this, is going to be walking you through what's on the board. This is all about energy metabolism today, okay? Rotem, I turn it over to you. Thank you so much for having us again.
Yeah. So I've been doing this exercise metabolism demo with Kathy for probably 2 years now, every semester. I came here about 10 years ago, originally from Israel, and I was bike racing in Israel and Europe, and then I decided to come here to Fort Lewis College because they have the best cycling team in the United States. So it was a great opportunity to kind of combine between academics and bike racing. I was also racing professional for a pro mountain bike team and a cyclocross team for almost a decade as well since I moved here. I didn't know what I wanted to study when I went to Fort Lewis, and I decided on exercise science. That was my passion. Then once I graduated, I started working with Durango Performance Center, which is a sports lab that used to be downtown, and it's owned by a local cardiologist and another exercise physiologist. His name is Dr. Bruce Andre. About 2 years ago or so, we moved up the Durango Performance Center up here, and it kind of merged with the exercise science department. And now we do stuff between like offering services to athletes, to the community. One of the services is exactly the test that you're going to see today, which is called an exercise metabolic and lactate profile. Okay, so we're measuring his metabolic efficiency and also his lactate levels while he's exercising. Other services like bike fitting and running gait analysis and all that kind of cool stuff. So we do type of services for the community, but also research with students, as I have quite a few exercise science students who do internships with. So let me introduce our guinea pig for today, Nash Dory. So he's one of the strongest, if not the strongest, Fort Lewis cyclist. I think he's, well, he probably won't tell you that, but I'm pretty proud that, how would I explain it? So, you know how this time was sometimes you exercise so hard that you say, I can barely see straight. You know, I've worked so hard that I can barely see straight. Well, this guy took it to the next level. Was it a week ago?
Yeah, last weekend.
It was a 24-hour race. Okay, so you race for 24 hours on a lap that takes about an hour or so. And everybody races each other, and he did the solo category, which means he races for 24 hours just by himself, no teammates, not a duo team or 4-person team. And at some point you started experiencing what?
Vision loss.
Okay. So how are you able to finish the race?
So basically, lost my right eye. I couldn't see. It's like looking through a windshield in a rainstorm. And so I just kind of thought there was something in my eye. Just kept racing. Thought I'd get better. And then 18 hours in, I started losing vision in my left eye. And knocked out a couple more laps, and then decided that it's not safe anymore because I can't even see the trail, and stopped for a while. Medics told me to stop racing. Told them no, I'm winning right now, I can't stop. So I saw the record that I was going for kind of disappear. So I decided to take care of my eyes, take a nap, get back on the bike probably 2 hours later and finish the race.
Good job.
which still barely could see. But I had someone right in front of me that I could like follow their silhouette. Yeah,
So even though he took a 2-hour nap or a break,
yeah.
then he raced again, he still won the race. So he had a pretty solid
You still
gap.
won the race?
Yeah,
Yeah,
had a
Nice.
solid
Good
gap.
job.
I had 3 hours, 3.5 hours on second.
Woo!
So
And tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're a student. What do you study?
I'm studying exercise phys. Took Hardy's class last year. I don't remember, first semester last year. And junior here on the cycling team, obviously. Race for a pro team out of Phoenix called Construction Zone. And 24-hour racing is kind of like a once-a-year deal, so it's not too common. Mainly just race XC style stuff, so like 1.5 to 3 hours. Yeah,
And then where was the 24-hour dish?
in Tucson.
Well done.
So yeah, it's
Awesome. So what we're gonna do today, as I mentioned before, it's a lactate and metabolic profile. Nash has done probably about 30 minutes of warm-up, and then we're actually gonna start him again. And the protocol of the test is we're gonna have him breathe through this mask, which is gonna be connected to this hose, and this computer over here is called the metabolic cart. So it takes the gas that he's exhaling, and it analyzes that gas so we can learn more about his metabolism while he's riding. You guys are going to be able to see those results on that board over there live, and I'll kind of put key points on things that you should look at during the test. Okay, the test is going to start at a very slow pace. If we're talking in terms of, for an example, to be comparative, is for running. Who's here a runner? Any runners here?
Oh,
No?
come on. Nobody's willing to say after that story, nobody's going to know.
So how do you pace your running, your training? How do you decide? Well, not decide. How do you say, I want to run at this pace or whatever pace for your training? What kind of terms do you use in running? Anybody heard of minute mile? I'm gonna run a 4-minute mile for a mile or whatever. So we're gonna start them at a very slow minute mile pace, which in cycling it means power. Okay, we guide the intensity by power. So if he's putting more power, it means that he's going harder. So we're gonna start at very, very low power, and every 5 minutes we're gonna increase the power by just a little bit. Okay, so the test is gonna get harder and harder and harder, and he's gonna accumulate that fatigue. Then at some point when he's going to cross the anaerobic threshold, which we will talk about, at that point we're going to start ramping up every 1 minute. So it's going to take him to his max really quickly. Okay, so it's going to go from like, oh, dilly-dallying, pretty easy, it's getting a little bit harder, it's kind of hard, and then pretty much I'm done. Which we also have this chart over here, which Emily will ask him, his RPE, rating of perceived exertion. So it's a very simple, basic scale, 1 to 10. 0 would be doing nothing, just sitting. 1 is kind of like walk in the park with the dog, a slow dog. And then say about typically anywhere between 6 and 8, that's where people experience their anaerobic threshold, which is a high intensity, but you can maintain it for a long period of time. And probably get him up to date to like 9 or 10, okay, depending on how hard he wants to go. So during the test, Emily will ask him, and we can't hear him through the mask, so he will point out, and then Emily will tell us as well how hard he's feeling. Okay, I guess we can get started with this. Okay, your hair is much as possible on the back, so especially on the right side. You can hold it with the other hand.
So who of you were the subjects for lactate lab last week, okay? So imagine having done that lab, but with a mask sealing off your face. Yeah. So while he's getting set up, guys, there's going to be readouts over here, and Rotem will walk you through some of them. There's some baseline information here, and then once he gets the test rolling, you'll be able to watch some of the parameters as they change.
So try it inhale. Okay. Okay. So closely. Feel everything around you. No? Okay. So what I was checking is the mask is sealing really well around his mouth and nose, so we don't leak any air while he's breathing. Because if we're leaking any air and we're not getting all the air that he's exhaling, then all the calculations we see are not going to be accurate. Okay. This glass is so quiet.
It'll warm up.
Alright, so you can start pedaling and you can again and get your lap button. Okay. So he started the test. He's riding. Thank you. He's riding 2 watts per kilo, which is very low intensity. And then you can see the computer here is starting to pick up his data. So every about 10 seconds, we're going to get an average of all the data over here. Okay. Right over here, we can see his VO2. What is VO2? What's that?
Velocity. Is it velocity?
Velocity? No, it's actually volume of what? Oxygen. Okay, so it's volume of oxygen in liters per minute. Okay, so that's how much oxygen he's consuming while he's riding right now. Okay? So what would be VCO2? All right. So that's once again volume of CO2 liters per minute, but the difference is with VCO2 is that that's the volume of CO2 that he's exhaling. Okay? So oxygen intaking, CO2 exhaling. Okay? Now right over here is what? Heart rate. Okay? You can also see the average of the last 10 seconds over here. This is the running time of the test. This is actually tracking of his flow of air. So every time you see that bump is his exhaling. Okay, so Nash, if you want to give us like a few quick breath in and out, quick ones. Okay, that's good. Hyperventilation, you can see those 3 quick ones. Alright, and that's also the ratio of energy he's deriving from fats and carbs. Okay, so right now he's about 20% burning carbs and about 80% from carbs. Okay? Let's see, this is kind of it plots out the dots for the averages, and you can see this kind of keep on going as we go with the test. A yellow line is VO2, blue line is VCO2. On the other side over here, it's the same thing. It's going to plot itself during the test. The yellow line is oxidizing burning fats, grams per minute. Blue line is burning carbs, grams per minute. In the beginning of the test, it's going to be a little bit kind of wonky like it is right now, because he's kind of just initiating exercise, and the body homeostasis while starting exercise is kind of changing a little bit. So you'll see everything kind of stabilize a little bit later on. I'm going to take the lactate here. So I'm going to take his lactate level, and what I do is I'm going to prick him on his earlobe, and then I'm using this lactate meter. Have you guys done the lactate? Okay. So you guys understand that. The reason why I'm choosing to use an earlobe compared to finger, I get much better results, less errors, there's less contamination over here, less pooling of blood as well, because when you think about it, his blood will tend to stay on the lowest spot, okay? And especially with runners, when I do the testing, the blood will want to kind of pull down. Where on the earlobe, there's much more consistent blood flow, okay? Okay, so I'm going to take this leg here.
So those who did the lactate lab and had your lactate tested, earlobe? Better? Worse? I don't know. Yeah.
Like everything just out their nose. Okay, so.
Well, he's got herpes on the front. Right. It's all about the oxygen carbon dioxide, and that's what Roland walked me through. Is how do we know which one you got which source? It's all about oxygen carbon dioxide.
You can see the graph is starting to kind of stabilize over there. Those two graphs, okay? And now we just took him to the next stage, so he's riding 2.5 watts per kilo. It's still pretty darn easy for him. Should feel like a warm up. Okay. So by the way, because I'm going to take lactates every about 5 minutes, every time we kind of bump up the stage, then my lecture is going to be kind of stop and go. Okay. So don't worry if you don't kind of get a certain part or whatever. Then at the end, once he's done with the test, we're going to sit here for another 20 minutes or so to kind of discuss everything. Okay.
Do you want to sing out lactate levels, not destroy them at the board? So you can see them, or
I prefer
are
that
they
he doesn't
just in
see
the-
them.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
Emily
No
tracks
worries.
them down. Afterwards, I'll look it
Thank
up.
you.
So let's start talking on biomolecules. What are biomolecules? You guys are awesome. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
So carbs. What else?
Proteins
Proteins.
and lipids.
Lipids. Fat. What is a fourth one?
Nucleic acid.
Okay. I was actually thinking about another one. Only appropriate for people over the age of 21. Alcohol. Okay. So how many calories do you get from 1 gram of each biomolecule? 4, 9, 7. See how those liquid calories can account for quite a bit, especially when alcohol shuts down your ability to burn fat. And when do you typically consume alcohol? If you're above the age of 21, obviously. At the evening, at night. So you shut down your ability to burn fat while you're going to sleep. What are you going to crave in the morning after? Pretty much everything. But salt as well, yeah, because it also dehydrates you. Where are we at for time? So, all of these biomolecules, the body doesn't actually use those specific molecules for energy. What's the common denominator? That we take all of those biomolecules, break them down to the single molecule that we can use for energy.
Okay.
ATP. What does it stand for? Okay. 1.5. What's his RPE? Rate of perceived exertion, RPE.
3.
3. Okay. It's also one nice thing about the earlobe approach is I did a one prick, one stab, and when he was about to start, and you keep a small, tiny bubble of blood, then it clots up really quick, and then you just break the clot, and you take the lactate again. Instead of re-poking again and again.
Everybody that was the subject is liking that, right?
Okay, so adenosine triphosphate. Can you tell me about the different parts in that molecule? What does it consist of? How many phosphates? 3. Okay. And? Sorry? Adenosine. Okay. Then there's a ribose as well, right?
Yeah, that's part of the adenosine.
It's part of the adenosine. So, where is energy in that molecule? Bonds of what? Which bonds? Right on. So, I'm going to draw real quick. If that's the adenosine head, those are 3 phosphates. So the energy is stored between those really strong bonds over here. Okay? So how do we cultivate that energy in those bonds? I'll give you a hint. A little efficient. What? Break the bond. How do you break the bond? Who does it? Who breaks the bond? You're correct about that. Who actually does it? Come on, yeah. It's the first class I actually had someone guess who's got a little fishy over
That
there.
was one of the hardest questions.
Yeah. ATPase, which is what? An enzyme. And the enzyme chops off this phosphate, then we get the energy to do whatever that cell needs, okay? And we are left with what? Say that again louder. Which ADP stands for? And another 3 phosphate, right? Because we chop this off, and then this is just kind of hanging out there. Okay? What do we have for time? Sorry? Okay. So if we're thinking about energy systems and the way we get energy to do stuff on the day-to-day stuff that we do, if it's exercise or just sitting and breathing and learning. The purpose of energy system is what then? Can you try to guess? If we need energy to do stuff, what do we need?
Fuel.
Fuel. What fuel? ATP, right? Okay, because I said that all of these actually break down eventually to ATP, and this is the molecule that our cells actually use for energy. So if we want energy to do activities, whether that would be just jumping, or even writing, or breathing, or just anything that the cell does, we need ATP, okay? This form doesn't help us. There's not a lot of energy here. This form has a lot of energy that we can potentially use, okay? So what is the purpose of energy systems? All of the energy systems in our body is to convert Okay? That would be the actual breakdown of energy. That would be actually the doing action. But if you want to have more energy to be able to do something, it would be converting ADP back to ATP. Right? So you want to take this and bring it back to this form. So we can keep doing this. Yes? Make sense? If we can keep doing this, we have energy, we can keep doing whatever we want to do. Okay. Okay. Doing great. Cool. So we're going to take him up to the next stage. Do you want some more fan? Yeah? Okay, so bring it up to medium. Alright, doing well. So overall we have two different types of energy systems. The ones that use oxygen and the ones that do not use oxygen. They're called what? Aerobic and anaerobic. Okay? Let's start with the anaerobic energy systems. There are two of them. Can you name them? If I'm going for a really strong sprint, which energy system will I use?
Anaerobic.
Anaerobic? Which one specific? When we talked about that, Kathy?
Well, I'm not lecturing this group. I only have to relax. I'm
Okay.
curious if they know this.
You mean the emulsifier or just the system?
The name of the energy system.
The molecule.
Okay, so first energy system that we're going to talk about is called ATP-CP. Okay, stands for adenosine triphosphate creatine phosphate.
Is that this ring a bell, guys? Creatine phosphate?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Okay, and it's an anaerobic energy system, meaning it's not using any oxygen. Okay, where does anaerobic energy system take place in the cell? Cytoplasm. Okay. Now, this energy system is a single step energy system. Okay? So basically what it is, it's taking kind of free ATP and creatine phosphate that's hanging out in the cytoplasm in the cell and just breaks down just this stage and gets energy. Same thing with creatine phosphate. It's another molecule that has a phosphate bond. So it does the same thing. It's a single step. Because it's a single step energy system, the speed that this can happen is maximum. Okay? Is as fast as it gets. Okay? So that means also if the speed of doing this is really quick, that means I'm able to do really high energy demand activities. What would be an example for an activity that uses ATP-CP energy system? Sprints, okay? Typically, anything below, we kind of generalize anything that's below 10 seconds, explosive at maximal intensity. Okay, obviously not just riding. It's not a maximal effort, it demands a really high energy demand. So anything that's explosive under 10 seconds is going to use this energy system. And what's the fuel for this energy system? What are the fuels that we're using? ATP and creatine phosphate. Okay? What do we have for time?
1.5 minutes.
Okay. Alright, doing great, doing great. Harley going.
The 6.
Okay. Can you give me an example of sports that are going to be probably very dominant in this energy system? Powerlifting. Sorry?
Olympic sprinting.
Sprinting for track sprinting. Okay. What else? I want you, meanwhile, while I'm taking the lactate, I want you to think about what type of movement or activities you do on your day-to-day basis, whether they'll be part of your sport or not, that you're actually using that energy system. Okay, so think about that for a second. Way to go, way to go. Great job. Okay. Alright, doing great. Keep up the good work. We can start seeing those values change over here. We can see a long time over here. As I mentioned, this is the 10-second averages. You can see his heart rate is starting to pick up. HR heart rate over here. You can see both his VO2 and VCO2 are both climbing up. Okay. So as intensity gets harder, you're going to consume more oxygen, and you're also going to exhale more CO2. Okay. What started shifting over here compared to the beginning? He's what?
Lower fat, higher carb.
Okay, so starting to use more carbs and less fats. We'll talk about why this is happening from a metabolic standpoint. What happened with here with VO2? Increased. Okay. So what activities or movements do you do on your day-to-day basis that you think are using this energy system?
Powerlifting or lifting weights?
Okay. Could be maybe when you're like walking up a flight of stairs with all your groceries bagged because you do it only one time. Okay. Or another one, who's a soccer player over here, or a lacrosse player. Okay, so think about when your game is how long? Your match? 45 minutes. So it's an aerobic sport, right? Okay. How many sprints do you do? A lot. Okay. So every time you do a crossover or you jump or any type of quick movement that you do, you're repeatedly using that energy system over and over and over. Okay? It might not be a pure 10 second that you go max, but you might be going that sprint maybe 95%. Okay? But you're still using that energy system. So say for an example, Nash is riding his bike. Okay, and then there's a big dog coming over and just about to bite him, and he sprints like the hell out of that dog. Okay, he's gonna start using that energy system. If that dog is quick, he's still there after 10 seconds, and he's still like going as hard as possible to get away from that dog. Which energy system he will turn into now? Not yet, not quite yet. There's one more anaerobic energy system. Has a cool name. I like that name. Think about that.
Pyruvic or pyruvic?
No. Anaerobic glycolysis. What does glycolysis mean? Breakdown of sugars, breakdown of carbs. Okay? Where does this energy system occur? Where does it take place? Cytoplasm. Okay? Same like this energy system.
1 minute.
Alright, doing great, doing great. Keep up a good pace. I hear some cheering. Come on, way to go. Great job, great job.
That was half-hearted.
Yeah, you're on TV. Come on, you're on TV. Make some noise.
His heart rate's 176. How many of you did 176 when you did lactic lap? How many of you quit when you were at 170 or 175? Yeah.
Nash doesn't quit when it's on his 70. He doesn't quit when he can't even see. All right, way to go, buddy. Way to go. Come on, come on, come on. Great job. Okay, and we're going to take you to the next stage. All right, great job. And this is going to be maybe perhaps it'll be our last 5-minute stage. Doing great, great job. All right, so talked about the anaerobic glycolysis, breaking down of sugars, carbs for energy, and it's anaerobic means that we're not using any oxygen to do this movement here. Okay, it does take a few more steps. Okay, in terms of this energy system, you have a few more enzymes involved in terms of breaking the sugars. Okay. So that's why the speed of converting ADP back to ATP is a little bit slower, but I still would call it high. Okay? It's not maximal. It's not the same speed you can do for the first 10 seconds, but it's a little bit slower, but it's still pretty high. Okay? What's the fuel that we're using here? No. Thank you. Okay? So this energy system will be the major provider of energy for maximal or really high level of exertion, anywhere between, I'd say, from 10 seconds all the way up to about 3 minutes. Okay? Now, when you're using this energy system, like high maximal intensity for about 2-3 minutes, what do you think about? What's that?
Nothing.
Nothing? Do you think about stopping? Okay.
Did most of you stop who were doing this? Like when you're hitting that?
All right, way to go, way to go. Great job, great job, great job. Doing great, doing great, doing great.
Good job, Ash. Keep it up.
All right, Danny, all right. Great job, doing great, doing great. Way to go, way to go. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Pull you back a little bit. So think about, listen, what byproduct is associated with this type of activity?
This one you should be able to answer fast.
Come on, come on, come on. Great job, great job, great job. Come on. Way to go, way to go, way to go. You want to finish this stage? Come on, let's finish this stage. Come on.
You're not blinded. Come on, Ash. Doing great.
Let's finish this stage. Come on.
You got it.
All right. Can you give me one more minute?
Come on.
Come on, come on. We're not. Way to go, way to go, way to go. Great job, great job.
Good job, Nash. Keep it up.
All right, way to go, way to go. Come on, come on, come on.
What's the time there? 30 seconds.
You got about, come on, 40 seconds. You can do it, you can do it. Way to go, way to go, way to go. Come on.
Finish the stage.
Come on, come on, come on. Way to go, way to go.
You do this.
All right, give me the last 20 seconds.
Almost there. Finish line. Finish line.
Way to go, come on, come on, come on. Great job, great job. All right, 10 seconds.
There you go. All you got.
There we go. All right, and you can stop. Okay, stop holding, stop holding. Go pedal, go pedal. Yeah. You can pedal.
Good work.
Well, it was obviously really hard. Can you tell us how it feels for people who don't like to suffer?
It sucks. I don't know. I feel like it's pretty constricting. Trying to breathe, it's not natural. And definitely between the outside and inside is a big factor too.
Okay.
Yeah, indoors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always obviously a difference between going hard for a goal of getting somewhere, passing someone, or not getting passed by someone, and just kind of riding towards the finish.
Yeah, I feel like a trainer too is way different than a road.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause when you get out of the saddle, you can rock your bike and kind of recover with the same power.
Yeah.
With this, you're still you're stuck in one spot.
Nash, do you know in your 24-hour race, do you know about where you maintain your heart rate in that 24 hour?
I think it was like 150,
Yeah.
55.
Okay, well, we'll let them cool down for a bit. Spin easy. You can spin it for a little bit more power if you want. It's like on 0 right now. So, let's go back to this energy system, which Nash was definitely using when he was at the last few minutes, okay? So when you're thinking about an activity, actually you give me an example. What would be an activity or a sport that really uses this energy system? Sorry? Marathons? No, that's a little bit too long.
The 400-meter dash.
400 meters, okay. What else? Even longer? Maybe
Like an
I
800.
mean, obviously not a mile in 3 minutes, but
Maybe like an 800.
800 as well. Okay. What other activities? Any type of really high intensity for under 3 minutes?
Like a
Right,
wrestling
something
match.
like
Wrestling match.
wide receivers going to the field,
Okay.
right?
Yep. That's right. If you're playing hard, whether that'll be lacrosse, soccer, basketball, there's a really intense period of time where you're running back and forth. Okay? What type of byproduct is associated with this energy system? When you're using this energy system, there is a certain molecule, a byproduct, that it's secreted. Okay? So, before we say lactate, before it becomes lactate, there's something else, and I'll give you a hint. It's something we say, maybe some of us say it, is when you're going really hard, then it's like, I can feel the burn, I can feel
Lactic acid.
lactic acid. Thank you. Lactic acid. Okay? So this is a very weak, maybe it's not the right word, but maybe a very non-stable molecule in our body. And pretty much as soon as this is created from this energy system, it is converted into two molecules. Lactate, you mentioned, and what else? Not pyruvate. No. Okay. Now, before we dive into this, these two, who do you think is the good guy? Who do you think is the bad guy?
Lactate's good guy, and proton is the good guy.
Okay,
Bad
protons.
is bad.
Protons, hydrogen ions are what?
Bad.
Okay, why?
Because they contain acid.
Okay, so when you have more and more and more protons, what do you experience?
pH level decrease.
That's right.
Good job, D.
There you go. So when the level of protons in your muscle cells go up, then pH goes down. Okay? And this is actually the acidity that you're experiencing when you're doing high intensity workouts. Okay? It's not the lactate. The lactate is actually the good guy. Good. Yeah.
What about like ketogenic?
We'll talk about ketogenic a little bit further down, because it doesn't relate to this anaerobic glycolysis system yet. So if protons, hydrogen ions are the bad guy, then how do we get rid of it? How do you get rid of the acidity you have, say, in your legs, or Nash when he just finished his max effort at the end? How does the body get rid of the protons? Sorry? Okay, it does not come out in sweat.
Exhaling water.
Sorry?
Exhaling water. Like for the
Not as water, it's CO2. And so what happens is those protons get accumulated inside our muscle cell. So first of all, the body takes those protons and moves them from the muscle cell into the bloodstream. Okay? Our bloodstream has very little tolerance to changes in pH. Okay? And that's why there is a system that's called bicarbonate buffering system. Okay? Now that bicarbonate buffering system, without kind of talking too much about the whole equation of that, is pretty much taking those protons and converting them to what? You mentioned it before. Yep, CO2. So you do a really hard intensity workout, you're getting lactic acid, breaks down real quickly to hydrogen ions, to protons. Those protons start increasing the acidity inside the muscle cell. Then the muscle cell is saying it's too acid over here, let's move those protons to the bloodstream. Then in the bloodstream, those protons are converted to CO2 in the bicarbonate buffering system. Then you have additional CO2 in your bloodstream. So what do we do with this CO2 now? It's in our bloodstream. We breathe it out, okay? So I made those wiggly lines of it, okay? So once you're starting to become more acid, you're going to actually breathe quicker in order to exhale those additional CO2s that were created. And let's even think about it. So if you're doing a 20-second sprint as hard as you can, okay? So you're pretty much depleted this energy system and you started using this energy system, but both of those are still anaerobic energy systems. We're not using any oxygen. So why is it that after a 20-second sprint, we're like, we need to catch up our breath, okay? We didn't need any oxygen for this activity. The reason is there's so much CO2 in our blood that we need to actually exhale that CO2 out, that our body gets the message to respirate quicker so we can get those CO2 out to balance the pH in our body. Any questions so far on this?
And I put the equation on the board for those who like
There you go.
such things. Right? How is it protons become carbon dioxide?
So, what do you think? Were you carrying any fatigue from your race? Feeling good overall? I mean, how do you feel?
Oh, decent. I'm still feel 24 hours. I'm finding any issues. Yeah, pretty, probably 80%.
Okay. Okay. Well, you're welcome to do as much more warm up as you want, and then you can just take your bike off. Cool. Did you have your bottle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Nash, for doing this.
Thank you.
Yes. Second time, I'm pretty sure.
For this?
Yeah, I think you now have 30
Yeah.
So let's talk about the good guy over here and why is it considered a good guy? Lactate. You remember? What do we do with those extra lactate molecules we have after doing this intensity workout? Okay, so they have two different pathways they can take. So the lactate starts accumulating in the cell, and then the cell says there's too much lactate inside, let's move it outside, so it moves it where? No, it's in the cytoplasm. It moves it from inside the cell to outside the cell. Where to? To the blood. Okay? So it takes those lactate molecules and throws them pretty much to the blood. Okay? Now, if it reaches the liver, then two lactate molecules can be bonded together in the liver into, what do two pyruvate molecules? Glucose. So pyruvate and lactate molecules are somewhat similar molecules. So what the liver would do, it gets two of those molecules, bonds them together, and then you actually get glucose. Which means we have more biomolecules, we can keep reusing this as energy. Okay? Now, it can be used in the liver, but if not in the liver, then it can also be used directly as energy at highly aerobic tissues in the body. Okay? Such as your heart, your liver as well can actually use it directly as energy if it needs it, and also your kidney. Okay? So heart, liver, and kidney. Okay? It cannot be used directly as energy by muscles again, but it can go to the liver, be converted to glucose, and then you have additional glucose in your blood, and then your muscles can reuse that glucose again. Any questions on this so far? So, moving on to the next energy systems here. We've talked about the two anaerobic energy systems. Now let's talk about the aerobic energy system. Okay? What's the other name for aerobic energy system? Right on. Where did you see it? On the board? Okay. So aerobic energy system is also called oxidative phosphorylation. What does it mean? Big word. Using oxygen, oxidative, to do what? Yep, exactly. So using oxygen to bond phosphates back together. And that's how you get the ATP. Okay? Now, typically, people kind of treat the aerobic energy system as just this one engine. The reality is that you have 2 or even 3 kind of mini engines under that aerobic energy system. So think about it kind of like a hybrid car, where you have the gasoline engine and also the electric engine in the same car. Okay? And that goes by what fuel is being used in that engine, in that aerobic energy system. Okay? So the first one would be aerobic glycolysis. Glycolysis, which is doing what? Using oxygen to break down sugars, carbs, glycogen into energy. So the main source of fuel is what? Or the only source of fuel is what? Glucose, okay? Which glucose is what? Carbs. Just reaffirming that we know that. So this is the carbs engine, I would call it, okay? And then the other one would be what type of fuel? Fats, lipids, okay? And that's called fat oxidation, okay? This energy system can also be called carbs oxidation, okay? I just go by the more academic term that they use typically, aerobic glycolysis. Then under fat oxidation engine or energy system, what is the fuel? Fats, lipids, okay? Where does both aerobic energy system take place? Nice, good. Okay, so before we go into this, let's kind of jump ahead a tiny bit and then you'll be able to answer those questions. Talking about the oxidative phosphorylation system, the aerobic energy system, there are 2 major steps that are consistent of this energy system. What's the first step? I give you kind of a hint.
Citric acid cycle.
Yes, also called Krebs cycle. Yep, it's all the Krebs cycle. Then once it's done with this stage, then we're going to the second stage, which is what? Nice. Why is it considered to be aerobic energy system? Oxygen is used where?
The electron transmission.
At the last step of the electron transport chain. Until that point, we didn't need oxygen. Just at the last point over here, we need oxygen to move electrons around. Okay? So thinking a little bit more big picture about the aerobic system. If we're thinking about what would be the 2 main limiters for that energy system, that engine, to work really good and work even better with endurance athletes, what do you think are the two main things that are limiting the aerobic system? Oxygen, okay? Because if you have less availability of oxygen in the air, okay, or you don't have enough oxygen to do the level of intensity of energy production that you want for those systems, then you're just not going to be able to do it aerobically, okay? Can you train, can you work out at the same intensity you do here at 65-12 feet compared to Laguna Beach? No. That's why we feel like gods when we go back to sea level, right? So the availability of oxygen is one of them. What's it? Thank you again, Nash. So what would be the second one?
CO2.
Why do we need CO2?
Breathe out the, sorry.
If we have, sorry.
Because of the buffer.
No, that's something we want to get rid of actually. We get rid of protons here by converting them to CO2 and then we breathe them out. What else? What else from everything that we talked here, if we had more of it, our aerobic system would be way better.
Lung capacity.
No.
Lactic acid.
What's that?
Lactic acid.
No. That's not going to help our aerobic energy system. It relates more to the anaerobic energy system. This second one here is pretty much the essence of endurance training. This is probably the single most important adaptation when a person is doing endurance training. What would you see increasing? Okay, it's a factory. No? Mitochondria, right on. Explain to us why, if you may.
Mitochondria, the larger they are, you have more space to electrotransmit.
Yeah, exactly. Think about if you have only one factory doing this. You can do only 20 shoes a day, okay? If you have 200 factories, you can do, multiply, whatever it is, you can do a lot more shoes per day, okay? So if you have more mitochondria, then you can do more aerobic work, you can run longer and at a higher intensity, okay? Those are the main two. Obviously there are more limiters, but these are the main two for your aerobic energy system. So, let's talk about the two fuels that can be used in the aerobic energy system. Talked about them before. Which fuels are those? No. Okay, so carbs and fats. Can proteins be used as energy? Yes, they could. Alcohol been used for energy? Yes. But we don't consider those, and I'll explain why. Alcohol, I think it's kind of obvious. I don't think you really want to do a race or an activity burning alcohol. Proteins are actually a biomolecule that your body will tend not to use as energy if it can, as long as it can. Because let's think about it this way, where in your body, in your tissues, do you store protein? Muscle cells, muscle mass, okay? So if the body, and that's the only place the body is storing protein, okay, in the form of your own actual muscle cells. So if you're needing to use proteins as energy, what is the body going to do? Sorry?
Break this apart.
Yep, break down your muscle, okay? That's obviously something that your body does not want to do. It will only do it under one condition, and that would be what? starvation, right? Or if you're running really low on carbs as well. If you're running really low on carbs, then your body's going to say, okay, I need to get energy from somewhere. I'm going to break this muscle mass. Okay? So if we talked about carbs, where in the body do we store carbs? In what form? In the muscle and the liver. And in what form? Glycogen. Is everybody familiar with this term? Yes, glycogen. That's the form where you take those sugars and you pretty much kind of branch them together. And then it's called glycogen, and it's stored in your muscle and in your liver. Okay? How much of glycogen is stored in those two? Do you know?
4,000 calories.
No. Okay. So let's not guess. I'll tell you. So it really depends on. Okay, let me put it this way. Since glycogen is stored in the muscle, then it means that for someone who has a lot of muscle mass, they can store even more glycogen, right? You have more muscle, you have more rooms to store glycogen, okay? So that really depends on how big or small a person is, okay? But it actually even more depends on their training level, their endurance training level, okay? A person who's sedentary and is not training to use his carbs for energy that much, then they're not going to store as much, they're not going to store as much glycogen. But for a person like Nash who trains anywhere between probably 15 to 20 hours a week on his bike and then gym 2-3 times a week, this person is going to double the amount of glycogen they can store for 1 kilogram of muscle mass, okay? So you can double the amount of glycogen of carb storage as you have. Say for an athlete who's about maybe Nash's size, I would estimate that it would be maybe about 400 grams, okay? That he can store throughout his whole muscle mass, okay? Then in the liver, it obviously depends a little bit about liver size, but it doesn't differentiate that much. I'd say on average could be maybe another 100 grams that could be stored in the liver. So total we have how many grams of glycogen?
500.
Okay. And glycogen is a carb. So how many calories I can potentially use from 500 grams of carbs of glycogen? 2,000 calories. Okay? 2,000 calories for a person, say like Nash, who's racing as hard as possible for, as he mentioned, for an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's probably about the amount of calories that he's going to burn throughout that whole race. Okay? He's probably burning about maybe just shy of 1,000 calories per hour when he's racing at his highest intensity. So that said, it means that he could be running low on his glycogen levels, his carb levels towards the end of a race. So what would he do in order to counter that? Eat a lot of carbs before, and that will make sure that those are full, okay? Because say he forgot to have breakfast, doesn't mean that he have 400 grams of carbs in the muscle in his liver. He's probably going to have a total of maybe 200, which is going to be the worst place to start a race, okay? So first thing that's true to start is making sure those glycogen levels, those glycogen storages are full before you're doing an event that you might run out of carbs towards the end. During the event, what strategy he will take? How do you bring back carb level? You eat carbs or you drink carbs, okay? So he's going to intake carbs through his drink mix, his sports drink mix, or those energy gels or energy bars or whatever he can digest while he's going really hard, because also the digestive system is kind of shut down when you're activity level goes up. Okay, the harder you go, the harder intensity you go, your digestive system is gonna be able to digest less and less. So that's why you have those sport drinks and those gels and those kind of chews and gummy bears even actually, that it's easy to digest, easily digested sugars. Okay, it's a good strategy during an intense race, not a good strategy when you're on the couch. Okay. So let's go back here. Actually, no. Let's go back here. So how many calories per gram we get from carbs once again? 4. I would call the speed that we're able to convert ADP to ATP to do this. This requires a lot more steps than any of the anaerobic energy system because we're breaking down carbs to energy via those 2 steps. So the speed I would call it for carbs would be probably moderate. Okay. Storage, we've mentioned glycogen could be maybe about 500 grams of carbs that we can store, and the actual amount of carbs in one's body is depending on, as I mentioned, on their trainability, how much they train, how much they teach their body to use carbs. If you teach your body to use carbs more, your body's going to actually build a bigger glycogen storages. Okay, and it also depends on your diet. If you're doing a ketogenic diet, if you're which means a low carb diet to no carb diet, then sure, you can have the potential of having 500 grams of glycogen storage, but you're not eating any carbs, so you're pretty much going to be close to 0. Okay. How many calories we get per gram for fats?
9.
Okay. Thing about fats is this sounds like, okay, this is a lot more efficient fuel. I can get more than double the calories for every gram of fuel over here. So why don't I just use fats all the time? Okay. The one issue with fats is carbs just kind of jump in over here to this first step and then to the second step, and then we get the energy. Fats, though, need to go another process, kind of like a pre-step 1, before they can jump in. That step is called beta oxidation. Okay? Beta oxidation, what that process is taking a long, what is this? Any guesses?
Acid chain.
It's a fatty acid chain. Yep. Free fatty acid. Okay, and it's a chain of what? What molecules? Carbons. Okay. So in order for that long molecule, a big long molecule, to go into the Krebs cycle, we need to chop those into smaller pieces. Okay. And that's what the beta oxidation process is. Okay? It's taking those lipids from where? Where are they stored in your body? Adipose tissue, fat, size over here. So it's taking it from there, and then chopping those molecules, and only then those smaller molecules can join in over here and go through here. So extra steps means what? Longer time, slower rate of this going on, slower rate of regenerating ADP to ATP, okay? So that's why the speed of energy production for fats is slow. And if we said, okay, with glycogen we have about maybe 2,000 calories that we can use in our body, how many calories can we get from fat that's stored in our body? Let's go on an example. Running out of work. So I'll make math easy for you guys. I'm about 145 pounds, which means 65 kilograms. Okay? I am about, I'm at my winter weight, and I have about 10% of body fat. And I know that because I've done a body fat test over here, and I can measure that. So I know for sure I have 10% body fat. So how much fat and actual weight do I have? 6.5 kilograms. How many grams in 1 kilogram? Mumble, jumble. What's that? 1,000?
Thank
Okay, so how many grams of fat do I have? Thank you. Every gram of fat can give me how much energy? 9 calories. So how many potential calories I have of fat? Take out your iPhone.
6,500 times 9.
58,500.
So what is it?
58,500.
58,500 calories. How many donuts is that? A lot, okay? Now, I like to consider myself as on the lean side of people. So even with really skinny and small athletes who are even 6% body fat, they still have practically endless amount of calories they can use from fat, okay? Practically. Now, once again, I'm going to ask it, hopefully someone can answer, is why can't I use just those fat calories for my racing when I'm going out and hammering like 2-hour mountain bike ride or a race? I mean, I have so many calories.
It doesn't produce ATP as fast. You won't have the energy.
On the point, yeah, exactly. It takes a lot more time to create energy from fats, and if I'm doing a hike, okay, with my dog, and it's really slow and it stops me every 10 feet, then yeah, I'm gonna use fats, not a problem. But if I'm gonna need higher level of energy production because I'm going more intense, harder pace, I'm gonna start using a mix of less fats and more carbs, okay? It's not an on and off switch. All those engines, all those energy systems, they work at the same time. It's just a matter of the intensity you go tells the body what engine they're going to use more or less, what fuels they're going to use more or less, okay? So if I'm hiking just at a slow speed and it's not hard, then I'm going to use mostly fats and just a little bit of carbs. If I'm going more intense, I might use less fats and more carbs. And if I'm going really hard, then I'm going to use pretty much no fats at all. And I'm going to use carbs also aerobically and carbs also anaerobically.
So if you're trying to burn body fat per se, then you would want to do like a like a lower heart rate intensity to burn those carbs slowly, so like a stair-step versus the spin bike.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you want to actually directly burn fats while you're exercising, you need to teach this engine to be more and more and more efficient, okay? And you need to train at the intensity that burns fat more and more, okay? So that's a good question that's going to throw me straight over here to show you. Let's go. Oops. Let's change this one. Okay, can everybody see this? Can everybody see the difference between the colors? Okay. So what we're seeing here is the yellow line is carbs per minute. So that's the oxidation level of carbs. How many grams of carbs he's burning per minute while he's exercising. Blue line here is grams of fat he's burning per minute. Okay? Now obviously we're going from when he started the test at minute 0 all the way to the end of the test, which was about 35 minutes. Okay? If we recall, the protocol is that the test gets harder and harder every 5 minutes. Okay? So the exercise intensity got harder and harder, and as the exercise intensity got harder, we burned more carbs. As exercise intensity went harder, we burned less. Okay. So here's an interesting thing over here. This line is 0, okay? Burning 0 grams of carbs or fat. He's burning negative fat, which thinking about it means that he's adding fat while he's exercising. Is that possible? No. Okay. Is my metabolic cart wrong? You better say no. It's a lot of money. So let me explain to you what happens. Keep in mind the method that this metabolic cart analyzes how much carbs and fats are burned are by the ratio of VO2 and VCO2. How much oxygen is consumed and how much CO2, carbon dioxide, is exhaled. Okay? So this one is practically endless. So when burning carbs, you're gonna, so this is once again, CO2, VCO2 over VO2, okay? So when you're using carbs as energy, when you're using this engine, aerobic glycolysis, you're gonna produce more CO2 and you're gonna consume less oxygen. Okay? When you're using fats, you're gonna exhale less CO2 and you're gonna consume more oxygen. And the more and less, I'm just keeping it as kind of relative to each other, just for you to know it's not any actual numbers or anything. But compared to each other, when you're using carbs, this happens. When you're using fats, this happens. And that brings us to this concept, RER. Any clue what that stands for? Say that again? No.
Respiratory exertion rate?
Respiratory, that's the first word. Respiratory exchange ratio. Okay? So it's exactly that ratio that we were talking before. So it's the ratio of the ventilation of CO2 produced, exhaled, ventilation of oxygen consumed. Okay? Now, it's a ratio that's almost always between 0.7 and 1.0. Okay? Now, if we mention that carbs do this and fats do this, where would we expect this ratio to be when we're using just 100% carbs? If we're just using carbs, not using fats at all, what would happen to this equation, which is the same equation like here? This is the RER equation. What do you think that would be equal for? If the CO2 goes higher and the O2 goes lower. CO2 divided by O2. 1. Okay, so if you're burning 100% carbs, your RER ratio, that number of CO2 and O2 is going to be 1.0. okay? And that's because this part of the equation is bigger. Sorry, this top part is bigger. This part gets smaller, so you get closer to 1. Now, if you're burning fats, what would be that RER ratio? 0.7, okay? So if you're purely just burning fats and just running this engine, no carb burning at all, the RER value would be 0.7. So if I take a halfway point, RER value of 0.85, which is halfway between 0.7 and 1.0, what would that mean?
You're gonna have carbs, have fat.
Right on, 50-50, okay? So you're getting half the calories for that exercise that he or she is doing at that RER level right now. Half the calories come from carbs, half the calories come from fat. So during the test itself, while he's doing the test with the metabolic card, we're always measuring the CO2 and O2 levels. So we're constantly getting the RER value pretty much every breath that he's taking. And it gives us that RER value during the test. And for our protocol, as exercise intensity goes up, what would we expect this value to do? Try again. If we started at a low intensity, where would that RER be? Closer to 0.7. As the exercise intensity goes higher. Okay, let's see if we see that over here. So you can see every line over here. Alright. Okay. So every line over here is an average of the data. Use my put it on the side like a football player. Okay, so every line over here is a minute average. Now, can we see that happen with the RER? It was 0.84, then it slowly increased, and then, whoops, it's above 1.0. And it even goes to 1.03. So, how do we actually get a value that's above 1.0? This equation is about CO2 and O2. So what happened when he got to his maximal intensity towards the end that introduced more molecules, CO2 or O2? Why suddenly he was exhaling even more CO2 than there was there?
Because he wasn't getting as much oxygen.
He wasn't getting as much oxygen, then he would start using what energy system? Anaerobic.
So does that mean he reaches lactate threshold?
When he gets to 1.0, yes, he arrives at his anaerobic threshold, his lactate threshold, they're kind of synonymous, okay? So when he's going even harder than his anaerobic threshold and his lactate threshold, you said it right, he's starting to use more of the anaerobic energy system. Now, what happens with the anaerobic energy system that could affect the equation? We're using the anaerobic energy system, we get more protons, we start to feel acidity, we need to counter that acidity by exhaling CO2. So suddenly, there were CO2 molecules that were just kind of created and they were not there to start with. So this part of the equation even goes even higher, okay? And it's not like he's able to consume more oxygen at that point because he's going anaerobic. He's going hard at this point. He cannot consume any more oxygen. He cannot keep up to that pace just with the aerobic energy system. So this part of the equation goes even higher while this stays the same. then this ratio starts going over 1.0. And this is why we're starting to see this thing. Since this is calculated by RER, at this point he was starting to use quite a bit of anaerobic energy system. So effectively it shows that he's burning negative fat, okay? Just because of the RER equation.
So it's what you'd ask calibration.
Because it's outside of the 0.7 and 1.0. Okay? So what I do with athletes who, like Nash, who come over here and do tests is I figure out their energy system, what energy systems they're really efficient at, and what energy systems they could improve on, and also depending on their sport. Like for an example, if Nash would tell me that he's preparing for a 24-hour race, then I probably want his fat oxidation engine to be really strong. Because you can't rely on just glucose, you can't rely on just 500 grams of glycogen in your muscle to last you for 24 hours. Okay? And that's why he said, I think Kathy or who asked him about the intensity that he was going during
Right,
that.
so what the heart rate was?
Yeah, his heart rate when he was racing, and he said about 150.
155.
Yeah, and his threshold is probably closer to 170, so he's not at his threshold because he's going to be burned out of all of his sugars by hour 2 or 3. Okay. So if it was a person who's telling me, oh, I want to do an ultra endurance at 24 hours, we really need to focus on this engine. If it's an athlete who's focusing on a short race, say 5-mile run, or even maybe up to like a fast half marathon run, then yeah, they can run on pretty much just glycogen, and you want to focus on the aerobic glycolysis energy system. Okay? So I help athletes decide on their training strategies. I tell them their training zones as well. I can actually measure and tell them this is how many grams of fats and this is how many grams of carbs you burn, and compare it to say 2 or 3 months from now and see how training changed it. Okay? So we're gonna wrap this up. Everybody got this equation down?
And are we going to be able to find out his lactate levels?
Yes. Do you want to write those down with me? You can write those down over here. So we're going to wrap this up, connecting all the metabolic stuff that we've learned to muscle fibers. How many muscle fiber types do we have? 3. Okay. That's a muscle fiber. That's another one. And here's another one. Okay. Thank you. Can you name those muscle fibers?
So oxidative fiber, fast glycolytic fiber is
Slow oxidative. Yes.
fast oxidative. And fast glycolytic.
Okay. They also have additional names, type 1, type 2. Are you familiar with that? No? Yes, I see like those. Yes, no? So this muscle fiber type, the slow oxidative, is also called type 1. The fast oxidative is termed type 2A. Fast oxidative is called type 2B, or sometimes it's also called type 2X. Okay? Which one is aerobic? Which one is anaerobic? aerobic.
And then the other two are anaerobic, or actually, glycolytic is anaerobic. Could fast oxidative be both?
Nice. You actually stumbled upon, then you answered the right answer, so that's good. So this is definitely aerobic, okay? This is pretty much completely anaerobic. So if we're thinking in terms of aerobic and anaerobic, and we talked about those energy systems, in those muscle cells, those muscle fiber types, which energy system would I expect to see here on this aerobic type 1 muscle fiber?
Say that again.
Which energy system, which engine from those 4 energy system over there would I expect to see on the aerobic type 1 muscle fiber? Oxidative phosphorylation, and you have two of those. The main one for the type 1 would be the slowest energy system, which is what? Fat oxidation. And then if we're talking about a complete anaerobic muscle fiber type, what energy systems are used here?
The anaerobic glycolysis.
Okay, what's even faster than that?
The ATP.
Okay, ATP, CP. Okay, yes, there is some anaerobic glycolysis happening over here as well. So what does it leaves us with this type 2A muscle fiber type?
Anaerobic glycolysis.
Okay. So I would say aerobic or anaerobic. And I'll explain to you why. This muscle fiber, actually, let me go back, actually. Let me ask you this. Can we change one muscle fiber type to another muscle fiber type? Say, can I do training or diet or anything or praying, or can I change type 1 muscle fiber type to type 2B? No. Then I can't be a bodybuilder? That's what you guys are telling me? It's not going to happen for me? No, you can't. I was just tricking you. You can't. You cannot. So this is determined, the composition of the muscle fiber types is determined by what? Genetics. In other words, your parents. Okay? To some degree. And so with that said, I can't change this aerobic muscle fiber type to be this type. But what I can do is improve the energy systems here. Okay? I can make this energy system be better. I can make the actual fibers themselves stronger to hold more force. Okay? And I will draw over here just for you guys to kind of understand, okay, what's the difference between type 1, type 2A, and type 2AB. So this is force. This is time, okay? And we're talking about a contraction of a muscle fiber. So, a type 2B muscle fiber has the ability to contract really fast and really, really hard and hold a lot of force. But it fatigues really quickly afterwards. Okay? Like when you're just jumping, okay? It's really quick. It's a lot of force in that moment, but it fatigues really quick. Same thing if you're running for a sprint. Start out really hard, and then you fatigue really quickly, okay? Now, type 1 muscle fibers will have the ability to contract, maybe not as strong, but they're able to keep contracting for a longer period of time, and they have more resistance for fatigue. Okay? Now, what what do you think it means on type 2A? Right in between, okay? So this, having 3 different types of muscle fibers allows us to mechanically actually do different levels of intensity, whether that would be powerlifting on one end or hiking or just slow movement on the other hand, okay? The one thing about it is type 1 muscle fibers will pretty much be aerobic. That means that they have a lot of mitochondria inside those muscle fiber types. It also uses oxygen, so we're going to see a lot more blood, okay, and a lot more vasculature, a lot more vessels inside this muscle fiber type. So under the scope, this muscle fiber type will appear to be red, okay, because it has more blood, okay, blood supply. And then type 2B, it doesn't use oxygen, it doesn't need much of anything else, and it's not really going to be as red as this one, and it's pretty much what's called the white muscle fiber types. Okay? Now, this type 2A is probably the most interesting muscle fiber because it's kind of like intermediate between those two. And compared to those two, this muscle fiber type is highly trainable. Okay? It can be trained to be more aerobic and have more aerobic energy systems and more mitochondria and more aerobic glycolysis, or it could be trained to be more anaerobic, okay? And use more ATP-CP and anaerobic glycolysis as well. What does it depend on if it would be one or the other? No, I'm talking about this specific muscle fiber type. How will I make it, this muscle fiber type to become a little bit more aerobic or a little bit more anaerobic?
Duration of
Okay, so activity, okay? So it depends on how you train, okay? So if I train as an endurance athlete, then I teach this muscle fiber to become more aerobic. More like similar to type 1, it will become more similar to type 1. It will become more aerobic, and it will choose to have more aerobic glycolysis adaptation. If I stop training endurance and I feel that I want to do CrossFit, okay? And I'm gonna do a lot more lifting, a lot more anaerobic stuff. Thank you, my parents. I don't have a lot of type 2 muscle fiber types, but I am going to get stronger, okay? This is mostly going to be by this muscle fiber type changing from being more aerobic efficient to being more anaerobic efficient, okay? So it's going to have more of the enzymes of the anaerobic glycolysis energy system that we mentioned, okay? So this is highly, highly trainable, okay? This type 1 is going to be mostly fat oxidation, mostly mitochondria. The more endurance training I'm going to do, the more low intensity training I'm going to do, I'm going to have more enzymes to break fat. I'm going to have more mitochondria. I'm going to have more vessels around the muscles. And this type 1 muscle fiber is going to get more and more and more efficient. Okay? And I'm going to be able to use higher loads even on this curve. So if it was a low one, it will be slightly higher, okay? That's how you become slowly better and better and better endurance athlete, okay? With the fast glycolytic, if we're talking about explosive movements, completely anaerobic, it's more specific about getting this anaerobic glycolysis and ATP-CP energy system more efficient, okay? And also creating the muscle fibers stronger as well so they can hold more and more force, okay? If you make the muscle fiber itself stronger. This is why when you do lifting or anything like that, you get sore because you have what? Micro tears. And then they after you recover well, they actually create a stronger bond, and that muscle fiber becomes stronger, and you can lift heavier or faster, generate more power. Any questions so far on this? Okay, so let's assume this is the muscle fiber profile of Nash. So his type 2A muscle fibers are aerobic glycolysis, okay? So if he's doing an activity where he's using mostly his type 1 muscle fibers, say low intensity, what fuel is coming in? That's right, free fatty acids. And then free fatty acids coming in, beta oxidation, Krebs cycle, electron transfer chain, all the mitochondria that are inside the muscle cell, this muscle fiber, and it just contracts slowly and provides energy, okay? Are there any byproducts? Anything that's left? No, not really. Maybe heat would be one of it, okay? Now, for this type 2A muscle fiber type, if we're thinking about Nash, an endurance athlete, what fuel is coming in? Glucose, nice. Okay, and we're using the aerobic glycolysis to break down glucose into energy, and it happens in all the small mitochondria factories inside the cell. Is there any byproduct? Why? We said aerobic glycolysis, right? Okay. Now, when he's sprinting out and when he's starting to use this muscle fiber type, which is probably going to be with him dominant on the anaerobic glycolysis, what fuel is coming in? Glucose again. Same molecule, just depends on how it's going to be used, okay? So he takes that glucose, he's going really hard, he's creating what? Nice. That lactic acid is then converted to what? Lactate. And? Okay. Lactate is going where? Liver or heart and kidney. To be used as what? Energy. Okay. Energy. Is that what you need right now? Or? And then hydrogen ions. What do they do in the muscle cell? Burn. Okay. So it goes to the blood, and then it goes out as CO2 exhale. Okay. Let me see if we get a nice profile here to show you one more thing. Let's see.
Was his lactate profile what you guys expected?
Kind of,
I
yeah.
don't know, what was the time on that, Emily?
So that first one is at 5, so each one's at 5-minute intervals. So it's like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of good reasons.
Okay, not a clear one on his over here, but. So by measuring lactate levels, what does it give us an insight of? So we're testing, think about it, I'm pricking his earlobe, and I'm getting the lactate levels that are in his blood. Where do we get the lactate? Through what process? Anaerobic glycolysis, okay? So lactate levels could also tell us a story of how much acidity, how much protons, and how hard he's working this engine, okay? Now, our body has a natural ability, as I mentioned, to clear lactate with liver, heart, or kidney. So it has an ability to clear the lactate when it's produced, okay? So when you're just sitting there, if you're healthy, no illnesses or diseases or any issues, and you're just resting, your lactate levels would be around 1.0, okay? And you're starting to exercise and you're using a little tiny bit more anaerobic glycolysis. You're still not going hard or anything, but as I told you, all the engines work at the same time. So you start an exercise, you're using a little bit more glycolysis. You'll create lactate, but you're also buffering, okay? So you're creating a little bit more, but you're also buffering it, so it will stay pretty much level around resting levels over here. At some point, you're going to start creating more lactate than you can actually clear out, okay, by those measures. And this is called the lactate threshold. It's synonymous with anaerobic threshold. This is the maximal intensity that one can maintain for about 1 hour of their hardest average pace, okay? So think about it, could be maybe 5 to 10 miles or even half marathon for the fastest people on earth, about an hour of the steady state hardest pace you can go. This is the level where you're creating lactate using those anaerobic muscle fibers, but at the same time you're able to clear it and you're able to get rid of the protons as well. So you're burning, but you can keep it for an hour long. Okay? That was a lot of information today. A lot. Any questions?
So just to make sure again, so when someone is burning fat or like burning, like maybe say they're on ketosis or the body's going through ketosis, does that mean that they'll perform a little lower than people who intake more carbs?
That's a really good question. I think it's something that's pretty a hot topic today. Is people term it as going keto, going ketogenic, which basically means that you're depriving your body from carbs. Okay, the end result. I mean, there are other things to consider with health benefits, perhaps, but the bottom line metabolically is when you're not eating carbs, you don't have a lot of carbs. Okay. When you don't have a lot of carbs, you're going to start breaking down more fats, and you're going to start breaking down more proteins. Okay? Proteins will come from muscle mass. Fats will come from your adipose tissue. As we mentioned with fats, is no matter whatever way you put it, there's still the physiological step of beta oxidation to happen in order to provide energy. So yes, if you're going ketogenic, your body will adapt and instead of using carbs, it'll start using more fats for energy. But at some point, probably earlier on for people who are on ketogenic diet, once you're ramping up to higher intensity where you need this to happen quicker, that you just don't have, that person will not have that ability, okay? So perhaps they'll be able to go at a slower pace for a longer period of time, but they're definitely not going to be able to sustain high power outputs or really high running paces, okay? So it's kind of really depends on what the goals are. If it's a high power, high intensity type of sport, then going ketogenic is a bad idea. Okay, if it's for someone who's maybe doing ultra endurance events, 24-hour event, and they can allow themselves to be ketogenic, but then intake just enough carbs so they can maintain the tiny bit higher intensity of racing, then it might work for them, okay? Because the intensity of doing a 24-hour race is low to start with, okay? and I actually have an athlete here in town. He's a runner, ultra endurance runner, who he won a 200-mile running race in Tahoe, which was last summer. And what we did in the lab over here is calculate the amount of carbs he needs when he's doing his race pace. Because his race pace is pretty slow, but he's still burning a little bit of carbs. So we actually calculated how many grams of carbs he's burning per minute, so we can tell him you should eat 60 or 80 or 100 grams during your 200-mile race. Okay? So just making sure that he just has enough carbs so he can sustain the intensity, but pretty much everything else will come from fats. Okay? The very most of endurance races today are running higher in carbs. It's only ultra endurance that could possibly benefit, but it's still, this is a very important, okay?
Tim, how early do you think you could tell that spread? How young might a person be where you could sort of get a sense for they're this athlete or they're this athlete?
Okay. So if you want to directly measure your muscle fiber type composition, there's only one, I'd say kind of golden standard way to do it, is to dig a hole in the belly of your muscle, take a sample of your muscle, and send it to a lab to analyze. Okay? And you're left with pretty nice stitches over here, and you're pretty sore for a while, and it's very invasive. Okay? So if you don't want to be invasive, there are different methods that are estimating. Okay? One of them is actually something that we do, the exercise physiology labs under the exercise science department, is you do a 1 repetition max. Okay, everybody know what 1 RM is? Okay, so you do the same, you do 1 RM test for bench press and 1 RM test for squats. Okay, and then you rest completely, and then you put, what is it, 80%, I think it's 80% of that 1 RM. And then you see how many reps you can do to failure bench pressing 80% of that 1 RM, or squats, or leg press actually. That number of reps that you're able to do correlates with your ratio of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. Because if we've talked about how are those muscle fibers differ in their ability to resist fatigue, so a person who's, okay, like me, I'm type 1 dominant, obviously, I'm not going to be able to do a really high 1 RM, okay? Then I'm going to take 80% out of that, and I'm going to be able to keep that reps to 20 or more, okay? Where if it's going to be someone who's a power athlete, his actual 1 RM number is going to be really high up there. He's going to take 80% out there, and he doesn't even have a lot of type 1 muscle fibers to hold that 80% for a long period of time, so they're only going to do a few reps. Okay? That was actually a research study that was done. I can't remember the name of the university, but it was, they did this test and then correlated it with actual muscle biopsies. So they were able to correlate that.
Interesting.
But I think it's hard to say. It's hard to say from without being invasive and taking muscle biopsy. It's really hard to say from an early age, because I will never put a kid, to do a 1 RM test. Also, kids at really young ages, it's even when you try to tell them to do 1 RM test and they're not in a position to do those maximal type of movements that might even be trained for. So it might be a little bit later on when an athlete can kind of start getting a sense of, am I more of an endurance athlete, or am I more of a kind of an anaerobic athlete? Which I think is good enough, because I would never be the person who Now, who's, say, have an athlete, for example, have an athlete who's, okay, he's more dominant here, he's a more dominant type 2 muscle fiber athlete, but he really likes endurance, and that's what he wants to do, or she wants to do. Am I going to be the one telling that kid and his parents that they should quit their sport and do something else? No, because they can still improve. The fact that there's this genetic predisposition doesn't mean that one cannot improve in endurance. Okay? As I mentioned to you, there are a lot more training adaptations than just, oh, what's your muscle fiber type? There's mitochondria density, there's those enzymes in the anaerobic glycolysis, there is also the ability to have bigger storages of glycogen. Okay?
Thanks.
Any questions? No? I have one question for you. Thinking about all this stuff, and we've talked about a lot of topics and concepts over here, what would you say is the hardest concept or idea that we've talked about? Just pointing at this whole thing right over there, that board.
Well, I was kind of going through like the glycolysis, pyruvic acid, like Krebs cycle and electron transport. I think just more in depth, like what produces like 2 ATP per glucose and all this stuff about NADH and fat. That's kind of like one part, but we didn't go over that, so it's okay.
Okay. The actual numbers of how many ATPs you can get from each one of those?
Which Dr. Lemer cares about a lot.
She does.
Yeah.
What else? What was hard? I'm not grading or giving you an exam over it, so you can tell me what was a hard thing to grasp.
I agree with that. I think the biggest thing is just the Krebs cycle.
Okay.
Very good.
So these two steps, they happen in the mitochondria, which happens in aerobic, mostly in type 1 muscle fiber, but also in type 2A. So 2 steps that are happening within the mitochondria to produce energy aerobically.
So type 2B cells are still going to have mitochondria, correct? And they're just
Yes.
using that system
Yep.
less efficiently.
I wouldn't say less efficient. It's more about how your training adapts it to have those type 2A muscle fiber types. We're going to have even more mitochondria.
Okay.
Okay. The type 2B muscle fibers are practically going to have very limited mitochondria.
And so is that more just like to produce energy at resting state, just to feed the cell, or?
For
Because if you're not even going to use your mitochondria in a type 2B cell, why have them?
for any production energy, just like you mentioned,
Okay.
like cellular respiration as
Okay,
well.
which is
Right, and don't forget that cells need ATP for things other than muscle contraction. Right, they need ATP to run sodium potassium pumps and, also the basic work of being a cell.
I mean,
It's not all about
we're
contraction.
always exercising. That's why
Right.
it's hard for us to think that we're doing something else, right?
Yeah.
Nobody laughs.
I'm just curious about metabolism. So, do you think type 1 would have more metabolism than type 2B, and then like type 2A would be like in the middle, or?
So, when you're talking about metabolism, and if you're talking about the rate of metabolism, the word as a whole, metabolism, is the sum of all the chemical reactions that happen. So it's not necessarily metabolism as aerobic. Okay? Metabolism could be also anaerobic. So we don't quantify it as more metabolism or less metabolism. Okay? Obviously, there's more metabolism happening as I'm exercising at a higher and higher intensity. Okay, because I'm just doing more work and there are more chemical reactions happening, so that's why the metabolism ramps up. Okay, that's why when we exercise, we multiply our resting metabolism like dozens of times. Okay, that's why also post-exercise, when you think about a CrossFit type of exercise, which is typically like who's here done a CrossFit class? Okay. Who's here been sore after a CrossFit Okay, I see even people who didn't who weren't in CrossFit. So CrossFit, like the core of the class is what? The WOD, right? Workout of the day, which is typically about 10-15 minutes of high intensity. Okay, which fuel do you use during that 10-15 minutes of intensity? Glucose, both anaerobically and aerobically. Okay. After that really intense 10-15 minutes, you might not have burned a lot of fat because it was really high intense and burning mostly carbs, but your metabolism after the workout is higher than normal resting. Okay, and that's where you're starting burning extra calories beyond the exercise itself. Okay, this is why they tell for people who are very limited with time, you know, just lifestyle, schedule, work, or whatever is, if they can't work out, you know, an hour a day, then at least take the stairs. At least do stuff that ramps up your metabolism for a few minutes. Take a break from the desk and do like 20 push-ups, you know, out the back, and then jumping jacks or whatever. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.